Testing 1, 2, there we go. There we go. Okay, a couple of questions. How often do you do blood work? Never. How often do you do blood work for hormones? Never. What do you do with the results? There's no results. So in the lecture on Thursday where I'll look at hormones, I'll show you the true tests are your symptoms. Gene vitamin deficiency test, good idea? No, don't have any tests. There's a few questions on the wild yam, which I'm putting aside because we will cover all of those when we question on hormones. There's a few and more on hormones. How to heal from varicose veins. There's a chapter in my book, Sustain Me, it's called Lovely Legs, and showing how you can manage varicose veins. How much protein is needed for a 200-pound man who is working out? Well, the RDA figures for me is 65 grams of protein a day. And when I did my nutrition course, I had to write down for 7 days everything I ate. I had to do an assessment of how much protein I was eating, how much carbohydrates I was eating. It was quite involved, but dear, I learned a lot from that. And I mean, you could do it. Anyone could do it. And I did it for 7 days, and I compared what my intake was with the recommended daily allowance. I was not having as much carbohydrates as they advised, and I was having more protein than they advised. But, it doesn't bother me because the body works well, and that's your bottom line is how are your energy levels? Are you maintaining your muscle tone? Are you sleeping well? Is your weight as you want it? So they're the best signs. So I had to put a name on it. I had to say this is how many grams you need because your body's response is your best guide. So acid-alkaline levels. If you've ever had a swimming pool, you have to test acid-alkaline levels every day. Because if the water goes to alkaline, algae grows on the pipes. And maybe that's happening in that beautiful water down in the creek. There's a lot of algae there, isn't there? And if the water goes to acid in a swimming pool, then the pipes corrode. So it's about balance. And the body runs according to precision balance. So let's have a look at the scale, the acid-alkaline scale. It's called the pH scale because when you dissolve acid in a solution, it gives off hydrogen ions. And when you dissolve alkaline in solution, it gives off hydroxy ions. So pH means potential hydrogen or potential hydroxy. So at one end, we've got alkaline and the reading's 14. In the middle, we have neutral. Neutral is neither acid nor alkaline. And all water should be neutral. I wouldn't be surprised if the water we're drinking out of the taps is neutral. When they put chlorine in it and fluoride in it, it becomes acid. And that's not a surprise. Blood has a reading on the pH scale, and blood's reading on the pH scale sits between 7.35 and 7.4. It will always be within that range because if it goes up to 8, if blood pH goes up to 8, that person will die and go into a coma and die from alkalosis. And if blood pH drops down to 7.22, that person will go into a coma and die of acidosis. So there can't be much variation there. And we don't have to worry about the pH of our blood because there are 2 organs that are constantly keeping it within that range. One is the lungs. That explains why. Your breathing changes. Don't know how many people have climbed the big hill. Your breathing changes. And where I'm staying, just walking up that hill, your breathing changes. And the reason your breathing changes is your cells are burning more oxygen and glucose, giving off more carbon dioxide and a little bit of lactic acid. And so that's affecting the blood. It's starting to drop. And so the brain says to the lungs, we need more oxygen because oxygen alkalizes. And when you breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide. So it's in that way that the lungs help to monitor and manage the pH of the blood. And the other organ is the kidneys. So let's take a magnifying glass and have a look at the kidneys. We have 2 kidneys. And the kidneys have little filtering units all on the edge. That's called the cortex. And in the medulla, the middle part of the kidneys, are the tubules that run basically down like this. And then there's the ureter. There's the ureter from the other kidney. And then the waste goes into the bladder, and then we urinate it out. So each kidney has approximately 1 million filtering units. So let's magnify the filtering unit. So the filtering unit, this little area is called the Bowman's capsule. It's where the blood is filtered. And then the filtrate that's filtered out of the blood, it weaves around these tubules. And you'll see by my illustration of the kidney that these tubules basically are sitting in the middle part of the kidney, whereas the filtering units are all on the edge. So the blood comes in, and the blood vessel coming in is bigger than the blood vessel coming out. And the reason for that is so that pressure builds up in the Bowman's capsule to be able to filter out the waste. In a 24-hour period, we filter 1,800 litres of blood. Now, we don't have that much blood, but every 2 minutes, 1.2 litres is being filtered. And out of that 1,800 litres of blood, 180 litres of filtrate comes out. This will help the people up the back, yeah? But we don't urinate out that much, do we? We only urinate out 1.5 litres. So where's the rest? So that's a shortfall of about 160 litres. Where's that? There's a reabsorption that happens here as the blood weaves through the tubules. So let's say the pH of the blood is getting to acid. Then it is right here that's monitored, and extra acid is dropped into the tubules to be urinated out. But let's say the pH of the blood is going to alkaline. Well, it is here that extra acid is pulled out of the tubules and back into the blood. So it is in that way, every 2 minutes, our blood is being monitored and, if necessary, adjusted. And that's why we don't have to worry about the pH of the blood, because our lungs and our kidneys are constantly monitoring it. I give this story in my book, but I'll relate it to you because it's such a remarkable story. We had a lady attend our program who was about to go on dialysis. She's 52. She's a nurse. You know what this shows you? That even the nurses and doctors aren't conquering these problems. She didn't want to come to our program. She rang me the night before and she said, I'm very concerned about coming to your health retreat. I said, oh, why is that? She said, well, I'm about to go on dialysis. My legs are swollen. You know why her legs are swollen? Because it is right here that sodium and fluid balances are being monitored. So if the kidneys aren't functioning properly, can you see the legs will swell? She said, my blood pressure is high. Well, it's also here that blood pressure is monitored. So it's not a surprise that her blood pressure is up and her legs are swollen because the kidneys are compromised. I said, what's your concern about coming? She said, well, I'm concerned that if I go through a detox program, my legs might get worse and my blood pressure goes up. She said, do you have a doctor there? I said, no, we don't have a doctor here. But I said, we'll watch you carefully. And I said, if you want us to do, there's a hospital half an hour away. Actually, an hour away. So we'll monitor you closely and we can adjust. Now, if someone says to my husband, do you want a doctor at your health retreat? He says, no, we don't. We're not against doctors. It's just that they're trained in a totally different system. They're trained in that system I told you before. It's really a system that's based on fear and drugs. Drugs. We had a doctor come to work with us, and as soon as there was a crisis, she just reached for the drugs. And we say, well, actually, we don't do that. We've got a herb. We've got a water treatment, because it's the way they're trained. And did you know that in the mid-1800s, you could go to a university, be trained as a medical doctor, and not learn drugs? How nice would that be? And that's what Dr. Kellogg, his retreat that had 1,000 beds in Michigan, people from all over the world came to that retreat. And he was an excellent surgeon, but the report was he rarely used surgery. He'd use everything else. He'd use water treatments. He'd use lifestyle. He'd use the physiotherapist. In fact, I was talking to Doc Malik. He does podcasts. He's a British orthopedic surgeon. And what he started to do, his eyes were opened. He started to advise his patients to go to a physiotherapist, to drink more water, to do just the simple things. And he cut his surgery down from 50% to 5%. So I told him the story of Dr. Kellogg. How nice. Because we do live in a body that can heal itself. I was on the plane one day and I was sitting next to an orthopedic surgeon. We got talking. He was in his late 70s. He said, most of the surgery I do is unnecessary, but he said they just demand it. He said, I just did a total knee replacement on a woman who's about 400 pounds. He said, I don't know how she'll ever heal. Yes. That's why we have to take control. That's why you might go for advice. It's like when my shoulder, I had a full thickness tear of my supraspinatus tendon. That's the tendon that goes over like that. That's the tendon that causes you to put the arm there. Then the deltoid kicks in. Anyway, long story as to how it happened. And he said to me that's a full thickness tear and a 1 centimeter retraction. He said, you will have to use surgery for that. And then he showed me how he could do keyhole, and I thought, oh, doesn't seem too bad, okay. But I'm a public patient, so I had to wait 10 months. So by the time I got the call that we can come in, I'd already fixed it. How did I fix that? Comfrey poultices. I did a comfrey poultice. Comfrey contains a growth stimulant, stimulates rapid healing. Its nickname is knit bone. And what I did was I did a comfrey poultice, and we have comfrey growing. It was in the winter, so I used the root because all the healing properties go to the root in the winter. Comfrey. They probably have some growing here. I'd say they'd have the comfrey in the garden. And I did the comfrey poultice for 4 hours twice a day. And I think it took about, I think it was this arm. Yep. So I totally healed it. Pardon? Self-heal by design, I have a section on some of the herbs, yeah. But just an illustration to show, remember what he said, that will never heal. Well, you know what I did? I rejected that thought. I like the sound of the keyhole surgery. It sounded so quick, but I'm a public patient, so I was going to have to wait 10 months. I thought, oh, I'll fix it, which I did. So back to the kidneys. So the kidneys are quite remarkable. They not only filter the blood, they also monitor pH. They also monitor blood pressure, contributing to that, and also sodium and water levels in the body. So this lady who came to us, I remember early that next morning, I was praying. I said, Father in heaven, this lady's about to go on dialysis. What do I do? And then God impressed me that I had some herbs in my garden that were going to seed. One was parsley and the other was celery. Parsley and celery are both excellent kidney herbs, and you get a concentration of the actives in the seed. So I picked the celery seeds and I picked the parsley seeds. I didn't even get them out of their pods. We just threw the whole lot into water and we brought it to a gentle boil. I also put grated ginger in there. Anti-inflammatory, makes it taste a bit better. Otherwise, it just tastes like weeds. And when I'd finished giving it a gentle simmer, I put couch grass in. Couch, I don't know, it just grows everywhere we are. It's a bit of a pain, actually. I think that's couch grass. I'm always pulling it out of my garden, but it's a kidney herb. And so every day we got her to drink a litre of that tea. And I said to her, you are never to drink a whole glass at once. You've got to go very slowly with your kidneys that are still coming, they're still recovering. So she came, her legs were swollen when we had the consultation with her. I saw that she had a gluten intolerance. She was having 3 cups of coffee a day and 2 glasses of water a day. She'd look at her legs and say, well, I got enough fluid already. She was on a no-salt diet. She had a major hormonal imbalance. So what we do is, remember what we start with? You just start with the symptoms. The symptoms are your body saying, I need a little bit of help here. She said, I won't be able to go on the morning walk. I said, that's right. But I said, what I'd like you to do is every hour, go on the rebounder for 1 minute and just do this. This is the health bounce. And what the rebounder does, it stimulates your lymphatic system. And that excess fluid is lymphatic fluid. So within 36 hours, the legs had gone down by half. And she went on the morning walk. She didn't do the full walk. She did halfway. She was starting to get excited. See, what you look at is symptoms of where you start. And then what you're watching is the body's response. And what was her body's response saying? This is good. We're on the right track. And so she was getting quite excited. When she went home, we sent her home with a bag of celery seeds and parsley seeds from my garden. But I also wrote down the kidney herbs and she could get tablets or capsules and take them. She emailed me 3 months later. She said, remarkable response. She said, I don't have to go on dialysis. She said, I have lost 20 pounds in weight. She said, I've just had a blood test and my kidney function is not normal, but she said it's going up. That's why I don't have to go on dialysis. She said, my liver markers are the best that I've ever known. She said, my inflammatory markers have come right down. She said, is she interested now? She's very interested now. Did I have to tell her to stop the coffee? No, she was able to detox in the week, and she heard about how it's such a dehydrator, which you have to be careful with the kidneys with that. Just an illustration to show what a remarkable body we live in that has got an inbuilt ability to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. And the reason why people aren't healing is because so many people are ignorant, not aware of what those conditions are. The blood pH cannot change, as I showed you, but the cellular pH can change. So the cellular pH should sit at about 6.5. Now that's very slightly acid, and there's a reason for that. The most acidic substance is sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid travels at the speed of light. The most alkaline mineral is calcium. And calcium, on the scale of speed, it doesn't even move. So slightly acid, and that's what the hydroponic gardener aims for, slightly acid, because if the hydroponic gardener's plant's roots are sitting in water that goes a little too acid, the roots burn. If it goes too alkaline, he doesn't get the speed of uptake of minerals out of the water and into the plant. So can you see it's a speed thing? So very slightly acid gives speed to all those little chemical reactions that are happening through our body. But if cellular pH drops down to 5.5, that's where disease thrives. This is where cancer thrives. Cancer thrives in an acid environment. Fungus thrives in an acid environment. So even though there's only the drop of 1 point, that drop of 1 point means 60% less oxygen available at the cellular level. And cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. So just ensuring that your cellular pH sits around 6.5, it makes it very difficult for disease to develop in the body. And I'll show you how you can do that.
Does this pH, is that the same for urine pH too?
Well, if you want to test that, well, the cell pH is determined by saliva and urine. But you can take saliva and urine tests for pH early in the morning and they'll be acid because all body's wastes are acid. And break fast, you've just broken your fast. So when you're on a fast, you've got a lot of waste coming out of your body. So the most accurate time would probably be about 2 hours after a meal. Do I test my pH? Never. But what I do is I give my body what I know is best to maintain that 6.5, which I will show you. My sister-in-law is a model. Her name's Abigail O'Neill. She's very beautiful, but she lives like this and she will not advertise for Coke or meat or coffee. And she's one of the top models, but she has ethics. And she will never model on Sabbath. She said, no, that's God's Sabbath. And, you know, the photographers love her. You know why they love her? There's no tantrums on her set. And one of the reasons she looks amazing, she's about 48 now. You look at her, you think you're looking at a 30-year-old woman, is because she lives the sustain me principle. Anyway, her name's Abigail O'Neill. You can have a look at her. She's very beautiful. It's a bit of genetics there. Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And she, even though she's got, you know, beautiful features, she's tall, and she would not look like that if she didn't live this life. Because many models are out of the game by the time they're 30 because they're drinking too much coffee, trying to stop the hunger pangs and all such things, and the body deteriorates. So how can we maintain the 6.5? I'll briefly go through sunshine. When we get adequate sunshine every day, it alkalizes. When you get too much sunshine, you burn, and when you burn, it creates an inflammation acid condition. But most people today are guilty of not enough sunshine. Water, use of water. Dr. Christopher, who Dr. Richard Schultz trained under, he said, here's a sign that you're drinking too much water. Put your head on the side and the water comes out your ears. In other words, it's almost impossible to drink too much water. Most people don't drink enough, and that creates an acid environment in the body. Sleep. This is a big one today. Most people don't get enough sleep, and that creates an acid condition. So 8 hours sleep a night, especially, you've got to grab some of those early hours before midnight. Stress. So trust in God. I'll give you an alkaline Bible verse. It's found in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. God will keep him in perfect peace, he whose mind is stayed upon God, because he trusts in God. A very alkaline verse. Stress. Stress can contribute to an acid environment. Abstain. I'm going to make a list of the things we should abstain from that create an acid environment. And it's probably not a surprise that alcohol and meat and caffeine and refined sugar are there. Inhale, oxygen alkalizers. And the best way to increase our oxygen levels are breathing through the nose and exercise. Exercise effectively increases oxygen levels in the body, especially if you're breathing through your nose. Nutrition. I'm going to have a look at foods that have an acid effect and foods that have an alkaline effect, moderation in all the good things. Nuts are great, but as some have discovered, overdo the nuts, you develop an allergy to it. So it's moderation in all the good things. So over-exercising and under-exercising cause an acid condition, and eating all day long, overdoing many of the good things can cause an acid condition. We're going to have a look at the foods. Can you see the keeping of these laws helps to keep our cellular pH at 6.5? But what I want to target now is nutrition. But before I do that, I want to give you an illustration. Some of my family and friends break every law every day. And the lungs and the kidneys are struggling, but they're just able to manage it. And then, oh no, the person has a cup of coffee with 2 teaspoons of sugar or a can of Coke, and that tips the scales, Lungs and kidneys are hardly able to keep up the pace. Blood pH starts to drop, 7.35, 34, 33, 32. Alarm bells go off. The last resort buffer system is called on. The most alkaline mineral, where is it? Calcium is pulled out of its biggest storage house. Where's that? The bones. It's pulled out in a form of calcium phosphate. And it comes into the blood immediately, 7.33, 34, 35. Oh, we're safe, but at a cost. Now we've got free calcium excess floating through the blood. What's the body going to do with it? Dump it in your kidneys, kidney stones, gallbladder, gallstones. Dump it on your bone as bone spurs. If you go to the doctor and you've got this painful lump, he'll say, oh, it's a bone spur. And if you say, well, what is a bone spur? He'll say, it's a calcium deposit. And if you say, well, what causes the calcium to be dumped there and not in my bones? Unless he's studied nutrition, he'll usually say, well, we don't know that. You can't blame genetics or genes for that one, can you? And that's often the two things that are blamed for things. Or they just say, we don't know. Have you seen, if you've been given a title of some disease and you Google it, it'll often say, no known cause, no known cure. Have you seen that? But this drug and this operation may help. May. That's why you're far better going this way. And so I read in an old book, and I love this sentence. I read it in Self-Heal by Design. This law, Newton's third law of motion, to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. This law never ceases to act as nature's equalizer, setting in motion compensatory forces to remedy every imbalance. Isn't that the true cause of disease? An imbalance has happened because the body's compensating for this imbalance. But there is a very simple way to get rid of a bone spur, and that's a castor oil compress. Castor oil penetrates very, very deep, and it can break up a bone spur, and the good news is it will never break up your bone. Psalm 104 verse 14, God gave herbs for the service of man. It says, where do you want us? Well, take that bone spur away, but leave my bone. But what affects the pH probably more than anything is the food that we're eating. So we're going to make a list of foods that have an alkaline effect and foods that have an acid effect. And the most alkaline food is the humble lemon. But isn't the lemon acid? Yes, it's acid where it should be. Okay, students, what's the only part of our body that should be acid? stomach. So when you have a dressing, and I know that all the dressings served here have lemon in them. When you have a dressing on your salad, it helps you digest your salad because the lemon helps to boost your hydrochloric acid. But when the lemon is broken down in the gut and dispersed into the tissues, it leaves an alkaline effect because of the alkaline minerals, which are sodium and potassium and magnesium and calcium and iron. So the lemon is high in these alkaline minerals. So it has an alkaline effect at the cellular level, but it has an acid effect in the stomach. Dark green leafy vegetables. Dark green leafy vegetables are very high in these alkaline minerals. And we should be eating dark green leafy vegetables every day. And if you're not particularly fussed on salad, pour the lovely dressing over it. And when I was first mother 27 years ago to Michael's 2 children who were not used to salad, in fact, they just about lived on carbs because Michael can cook toast really well, full stop. That's all he can cook. And so they really, and he's a businessman, it was just carbs, carbs, carbs. It was cheap, just easy. And by the way, his little daughter, who was 11, she had quite a tummy on her. Within 1 month, she'd slimmed right down. Because when I came in as mother, the carbs went right down. The diet changed. The food was beautiful, but it was totally different. And so what I'd do is they'd sit down to eat and I'd have maybe 2 bowls of salad. I'd have some delicious dressings there. And we'd sit down to eat and Michael and his 2 children are looking very worried. This new woman's come into our home and we have to eat salad. And Michael would look at it and he'd say, are there any potatoes? I'd say, almost ready. Is there lentil? Yeah, almost ready. And I'd smile. And they're hungry. You haven't fed them for 5 hours. And my children straight into it because that's what they've been raised on from little kids. And so they'd all start eating. And when the salad was half gone, I'd slip out. Oh, our potatoes are ready. Lentils are ready. Whatever is there. Michael said to me years later, he never realized what I was doing. So that's how you get your family to eat more green leafy vegetables. You make it crisp, make it delicious, buy good quality. In fact, my daughter Jessica, when she was 14, her girlfriend came to lunch one day and we're eating the salad. She said, if my mum's salad tasted like this, I'd eat it. In other words, her mother's salads were pretty sad. By the way, aren't the tomatoes magnificent here? They're from the garden. That's why they taste so good. You know what you're tasting? Minerals. Because there's no sprays and the soil is fed, and that's why the flavor's so good. So dark green leafy vegetables are phenomenally high in this. We should be eating a nice big dark green salad every day, and if we don't, we should have a dose of green barley. I know what I'd prefer is the dark green leafy veggie. Dark green leafy vegetables do not change the mineral content when they're cooked. So whether they're raw or cooked, dark green leafies are very high. And vegetables. Vegetables are alkalizing. Vegetables are high in these alkaline minerals. But there is a question mark. And the reason there's a question mark is because there is one group of vegetables called the nightshades. And for some people, these have an acid effect, and some people, they have an alkaline effect. Tomato, bell pepper, and eggplant, sometimes called aubergine. And the last one in the nightshade family is the potato. And this is not a sweet potato. Sweet potato is not a potato, it's a yam. So this is the group of vegetables that can have an acid-forming effect. I have seen it. I've been seeing this for years and years. So if someone has arthritis, I say you're best to stop the nightshades. Not forever, just until you heal. One lady stopped her. She stopped it. In fact, it's a very interesting story. This couple, they retired, and they retired at 65, and they went into an aged care facility. The lady had arthritis. They were unable to look after their house very well anymore. He had a bit of gout, few aches and pains. And so when they retired, their daughter gave them a set of my DVDs. And they used to watch it every night. And they thought, we've got nothing to lose. Let's do it. So they started to implement more exercise, drinking more water. They both decided to ease off their coffees. And they started to have their main meal at 9 and then another one at 3. And within 6 months, the lady's arthritis had gone. Within 6 months, the man's gout had gone. They both lost weight. They both felt fantastic. So they booked themselves out of the aged care facility. Isn't that a wonderful story? They bought a big van. They decided to travel around Australia. And they stopped on northern New South Wales, drove in an hour to Misty Mountain Health Retreat and did a program there. This lady's just smiling the whole time. She said, oh, I can't believe it. She said, I feel better now at the age of, I think by now she was 67, than I felt in my 40s. Such a simple, just the sustain me principles. And she had stopped the nightshade. She said, do you think I could eat that now? I said, I don't know. Who'll tell her? Her body will tell her. One lady said, I conquered my arthritis. I can have half a tomato 3 days a week. She said, I don't do the bell pepper because my body reacts pretty quickly to that. Sometimes there's a bit of twinging in the joints. One lady said it repeats on her. Listen to the body. She said a little bit of eggplant now and then, maybe a smaller potato every day. My husband loves potatoes. So you're the doctor. You know what one lady said? I can eat the red bell pepper and not the green. And another lady said, well, I can eat the green and not the red. Another lady said, I can eat the cooked and not the raw. Another lady said, I can eat the vice versa. I love these stories. What are they stories of people doing? They're listening. They're listening. So it was 2021 when I went back to Australia, and everyone says, how did you get into Australia in 2021? It was a miracle. I booked in, I had a flight. They tried to cancel it, but we managed to hold on to it. And they said it was the only seat left for the rest of the year. It was October. Before I got to the airport, a lady gave me a book, and it's called The Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry. You've heard of that book? And so when I got to Australia, they handled me as if I had the plague. They put me on a bus that would seat about 60 people, me, myself, and I. This is 2021. And then they took, and I'm texting Michael, they're driving here, because he's saying, where are you? So he followed the bus, and I got to the Wentworth Hotel, it's a 5-star hotel. I wasn't allowed out of the bus. The military had to take my bags. The military had to stop the people on the footpath. And then a policewoman came in and escorted me. Michael said, you should have walked across like that. I was put in a room for 2 weeks, and I was not allowed out of that room. Michael said, I thought solitary confinement had been outlawed. Anyway, I'm telling you this because I'm in this room with this book. I started to read the book because I'm an avid reader, and I got really annoyed with the book because he's claiming that the tongue took 20 million years to develop, and this in the food courts, but you know, I'm in a room. I kept opening the book again. And I'm so glad I read that book. I think God planned it that way. Because the whole book is about lectins. And what he claims is we should not be eating plants because they're high in lectins. So I'm intrigued. So I wanted to know from God's point of view, lectins are in unripe fruit. And when the fruit is ripe, there are no lectins. Well, that made sense to me. And when the figs are on the tree, no bird will eat a green fig, will they? As soon as the figs have a bit of colour, the birds know because it's sweet. So I thought, well, that makes sense. I understand why God put lectins in food. Another very interesting point, if you have a good gut flora and you happen to eat a food with lectins, it'll disarm the lectins. So come on, more fibre. Did you have a nice arrangement of fibre this morning? The more variety of fibre you have, the more variety of microorganisms you have. And those microorganisms play a major protective role. And they even disarm the lectins. So I thought, well, that makes sense. Because it has to make sense to me. Maybe it's because I'm the daughter of an inventor. If it doesn't make sense, I just think, that doesn't make any sense at all. Legumes, high in lectins, but don't you love the but? If they're prepared in the traditional method, what's the traditional method? Soak them, rinse them, bring them to the boil. You know all that white froth? Wind, lectins, wash it away. Wash it away. I well rinse halfway through cooking. You're not going to rinse at the end of the cooking or wash half your beans away. And then I put it into the sauce and I let that slowly simmer. No lectins. Pressure cook halfway through cooking. Yep. Oh, that's dirty water. Look at that, dirty water. You're washing away the phytic acids, you're washing away the lectins. And you'll find you can digest them a lot better. If you still can't, you just need to build up your microorganisms. So I thought, well, that makes sense. And the sourdough method of making bread disarms the lectins. So you know what that takes us to? The book Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. She looks at all the traditional ways of preparing food. Did you know the Scots used to soak their oats through the day and put it on the corner of the fuel stove and slowly cook it all night? Disarms the lectins. So if we're preparing plant foods in the traditional way, well soaked, well cooked, well rinsed, sourdough the grains, and another grain that's high in lectins is quinoa. But have you noticed if you rinse the quinoa 5 or 6 times, when it's cooked, there's no bitterness? That bitterness is lectins. So if the plant food is prepared properly, the lectins isn't a problem. But of course, Dr. Stephen Gundry's thought was, well, who's going to do that? Well, let's just eat meat. Well, I've simplified that a little bit. What about the nuts? Well, when you chew them very, very well, the digestive juices help to break down the lectins, and then you've got the nice gut flora that does an extra job of breaking them down. I don't. I do. I think they taste nicer. Some people say, no, you can't eat nuts unless you soak them and dehydrate them. I'll leave it up to you. But I like what about beans from a can? Yeah, you don't know. You should never say never, but I never eat beans from a can. I love the fresh beans. It's just before you go to bed, what am I going to eat tomorrow? I think I'll have beans. Put them on to soak before you go to bed. It's very easy. Or soak them all day and put them in a slow cooker all night. If you're going to do a slow cooker or a pressure cooker, you bring them to the boil in a pot, and that's where you'll see all the froth. Rinse that all off, then put it into your pressure cooker, then put it into your slow cooker. And so if our gut is working well, and if we're preparing our food properly, lectins are not a problem. Lectins are in these foods. But traditionally, the Europeans always de-seeded and skinned tomatoes. They always de-seeded and skinned bell pepper. Well, guess what? When they did that, they took the lectins away. So I was actually very glad that I read the book because I could see the true perspective on lectins. Lectins are not a problem if you're preparing the food properly. They're not a problem if you've got good gut flora. So what happens if lectins do get into your blood? That's when they increase inflammation. So if you prepare your food properly and take the extra caution if you have arthritis or gout to really just eliminate those foods until you conquer the problem, which is very conquerable. So that's the truth on lectins. If you cook tomato with olive oil, and I think you'll agree with me, they go together very nice, as my mother would say, like a horse and carriage. If you cook these two together, something's released that's not available in the raw tomato and not even available in the cooked tomato unless you cook it with a bit of oil. It's lycopene. And lycopene is a potent antioxidant that has the ability to reduce the inflammation of the prostate gland. So every man over the age of 40 should be having a cooked tomato, an olive oil dish 3 times a week, and that's not hard. It's a really nice base for many bean dishes. You do it with kidney beans, you got a Mexican dish. You do it with lentils, you got a dal. It's also really nice with chickpea. All your legumes have slightly different flavors, so you can get a nice variety there. What about fruit? Fruit has a question mark. Why does fruit have a question mark? Vegetables are high in fiber, they're high in minerals, and they're low in sugars, whereas fruit is high in fiber, high in sugars, low in minerals. That's the difference. And if someone has a yeast presence, they have a yeast presence in their body and they're eating a lot of fruit, the sugar in the fruit will feed the yeast. And as the yeast feeds on the sugar in the fruit, it gives off acetic acid. It gives off uric acid. It gives off lactic acid. And it gives off alcohol. So can you see what's happening here? If someone's eating a high fruit diet, and they've got a yeast presence in their body, sugar in the fruit feed the yeast, and it has this acid residue, which means it is now creating the very environment where yeast thrives, which is the 5.5 environment. So if someone has a yeast presence, they're best to keep the fruit down low until they conquer the yeast, and it can be conquered. It's not forever. Alcohol in the liver breaks down to acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is a neurotoxin. What's a neurotoxin? A neurotoxin kills brain cells. Whew. And there are 5 places you can be exposed to acetaldehyde. Number 1 is if a person has a yeast presence and on a high fruit diet, causing the yeast to give off this as it works. Number 2, alcohol is acetaldehyde. Cigarette smoke gives off some acetaldehyde. Car fumes give off some acetaldehyde. And vinegar is acetaldehyde. So that's why we don't use vinegar. We do have vinegar, and it's really good on the toes if someone has athlete's foot. If a good way to know you have yeast is look at your tongue. Your tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. In the break, everyone runs to the bathroom to look at their tongue. And there are a variety of different symptoms to having a yeast presence in the body. Probably the most common are things like thrush, jock itch, anal itch, athlete's foot. They're probably some of the most common symptoms of a yeast presence in the body. There are 2 grains that are lectin-free. One is millet. So we had millet for breakfast this morning. It's one of my favorite. I rarely have a grain for breakfast, but if I do, it would be millet. My grandchildren love millet. but I'm just telling you how to cook it. 1 cup of millet, 4 cups of water. So when I had that millet this morning, I put a lot of stewed apple and I put some of that almond milk and squashed it in, and that softened it up because it can get a little dry. But it's an alkaline grain and it is lectin free. Sorghum. In Australia, sorghum was only ever grown for the cows. And then they discovered that sorghum is gluten free. And the millet is gluten-free. Do you know gluten is a lectin? So they, and I'll explain why there's so much gluten intolerance today in a minute. So now they grow it for people. And you might have heard of Weet-Bix. It's a very, very popular Australian cereal. Well, they make gluten-free Weet-Bix now out of sorghum. And you can buy sorghum flour. Buckwheat. Buckwheat is a gluten-free grain, and it's also an alkaline grain. So at Misty Mountain, we don't use oats at all because oats are very high in lectins. My sons have oats for breakfast every morning. They love it. Not a problem because I don't have a health problem. So I leave oats to the person. Some people can handle it, some people cannot. And because there's an element that cannot, we don't serve it at our health retreat. And so a lot of retreats make granola out of oats, but we make granola out of buckwheat. We soak it for a couple of hours, rinse it very well, and then dehydrate it. And they're really crunchy, so we make that as our base for our granola. Also, spelt. Spelt is a grain that is a wild hybrid from the original wheat. So let me give you the wheat story. The original wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn. And it is not sure when, but it is estimated a few thousand years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Now, the protein or the gluten structure in Enkenhorn is very fragile. And that's good news. It means easily to digest. Emma wheat, the wild hybridness of it caused a slightly more complex protein structure, but still fairly fragile. And then it was in the 1850s that this Emma wheat was put through intensive crossbreeding to produce the hybridized wheat of today. And the hybridization of that wheat created a very complex protein or gluten structure. And it's almost only a cast iron gut that can break that down. Now, if that hybridized wheat is made into a sourdough bread, the culturing process in the sourdough breaks up the protein or the gluten structure and it becomes less complex. Emma wheat did a wild hybrid with another field grass, which produced the spelt strain of wheat. And it has retained the fairly fragile structure. And if that spelt flour is made into a sourdough bread, it brings the gluten or the protein structure way back to its original fragile structure. And that is why a lot of people that can't handle wheat can handle wheat sourdough. And the celiacs that can't handle spelt, they can often handle it in a sourdough bread. So celiac is someone that can't even touch food with gluten in it. Gluten intolerance, they can usually handle spelt, and gluten sensitivity can usually handle spelt. That's why you're the doctor there. Try it. See what works best. Your body will tell you if it works and it doesn't. Do I eat wheat? I do, but not very much. My body doesn't react at all, but I'm sure if I ate it 3 times a day, there'd start to be a reaction. One of the reasons why there is so much gluten intolerance today is a few reasons. One is the emergence of this hybridized wheat. Another is many guts, they haven't got the microorganisms in the gut because of antibiotics, because of vaccines, because the majority of wheat today is grown with glyphosate or Roundup. And that can have a devastating effect in the gut. So there's a lot of reasons. And also a lot of people just overdo it. Cereal and toasted breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for tea, just overdoing the wheat. And the other is children are being fed starch too young. So children are being given bread when they haven't even got their molars through to break down the starch. So no wonder we have so much gluten intolerance. So my friend who's a doctor, she just retired at the age of 80. She said 40 years ago, you never heard of gluten intolerance. 20 years ago, it was starting to emerge. But today it's just huge. And so I've just touched on some of the reasons why this is so. And different people, there might be slightly different reasons, but the hybridization of that wheat certainly changed the structure. And spelt sits more on the alkaline side, whereas the wheat, it sits on the acid side, that hybridized wheat of today. The acid-forming minerals are sulfur and phosphorus and chlorine. So if this hybridized wheat is grown with superphosphate, that'll really up the phosphorus and the chemicals on top of that. And by the way, they spray all wheat today with folic acid. And folic acid's toxic. And what's every pregnant woman told to have? Folic acid. Now, something's happening today that's become very common, and I never heard of it when I had babies. Tongue tie. Tongue tie, which is the tongue is tied down with a thin piece of skin. Lip tie, cheek tie. In fact, my great-grandson, she had all of them. What we need is folate. That's what we need is folate. And where do we get folate? Dark green leafy vegetable. What the folic acid does was it interferes with the development of fascia. What's fascia? Fascia is a thin balloon type material that surrounds all our organs, all our muscles, and that thin skin is fascia. So it's displaced. Why is it displaced? Because of folic acid. You Google folic acid. You have a look at it.
Is that due to the female not intaking?
The female, see, every time you eat wheat, you're getting folic acid. And every pregnant woman is told to eat. Am I right? Folic acid. And now it's producing all of these tongue ties. What our body needs is folate, not folic acid. Anyway, explore that. There are a few doctors that are blowing the whistle on it. You might get angry when you read it. It's just wrong what they're doing. And the reason why my little great-grandchild has it is because I think her mum loves bread. So when you're eating a lot of wheat, you're getting a lot of folic acid. So it's the folic acid that's toxic, but what we should be eating is folate. And folate is in a wonderful abundance in, again, your fresh, dark green leafy vegetables. Let's continue on. There are two nuts that are alkaline, almond and Brazil. Almond's called the king of nuts because it is the highest in protein, the highest in iron, and it's alkaline. Brazil is phenomenally high in selenium, and that's what our thyroid needs. Our thyroid needs selenium to convert iodine into thyroxine. And if you have mercury fillings in the mouth, they have an affinity for selenium. Well, the doctor who you go to that finds you've got a thyroid problem, will he ever ask you about the mercury fillings in your mouth? No, never. In my book, Sustain Me, I mention all of that in the thyroid chapter. 5 Brazil nuts a day is all you need to get all the selenium you need in a day. Sorry? Are there? Oxalates are only a problem if someone's on a very acid diet. And where? Not unless you have a bucket full. Got that? That's where moderation's good. Jacqueline found out. It's like the anti-nutrients in soy. You hear a lot about that. Well, it's only a problem if you eat a bucket full a day. So that's where the moderation comes in. And the dairy industry hates soy, so they're going to put a lot of information out there damning soy. What milk do I have? I'm weaned. I eat food. I don't have milk. I've got tea. What about soy? Because people are buying soy milk instead of dairy milk. That's why. Only if it's non-GMO, only if it's GMO. And a lot of American soybeans are, so you have to make sure it's organic. Legumes. Lima beans, lentils, and soy are the 3 alkaline legumes. And again, soy is only a problem if it's been grown with poisons and it's been genetically modified. Then soy is a problem. Also, all your seeds sit on the alkaline side. The most acid-forming food that can go into the body is refined sugar. It's a pure acid. Touch on this when we talk on cancer. He could turn cancers on and off by the amount of meat and dairy products he was giving the rats, because cancer thrives in an acid environment. If someone likes meat and wants to eat meat, it should be a small part of the diet, must be organic, it must be packed out with a lot of vegetables. It's the only way you can safely take it. Myself, I eat plants. Aged cheese, what's the blue in the blue vein cheese? It's mold. So it's extremely acid. On the pH of 7, you've got your fresh cheeses like feta, ricotta, cheeses like that are fresh. Can they be eaten? Well, you'd have to check the cows they came from. Problem today is a lot of unhealthy cows. 80% of antibiotics go to the husbandry, you know, the animals. Also, all caffeine foods and drinks have an acid effect. Alcohol is not a food, but it certainly creates an acid environment. Tobacco is not a food, but it creates an acid environment. Drugs are chemicals, and they create an acid environment. All your other grains, other than the millet, sorghum, and buckwheat and spelt, all your other legumes, other than lentil, soy, and lima bean, and all your other nuts, other than Brazil and soy. Sorry, Brazil and almond. So to maintain this 6.5 environment, we should be taking in 20 to 30% from the acid side. And that should ideally come from this section here. And we should be taking 70 to 80% from the alkaline side. Now, what that percentage will do is maintain the 6.5 environment at the cellular level, which is where our body runs very well. So an easy way to do it is just eat more vegetables, more greens, start pursuing the other grains.
You haven't touched on yogurt, organic, plain yogurt.
It would sit, so if it comes from a healthy cow and if it's raw, that yogurt and that feta, they're basically about the same because the cow's stomach brings the milk to a feta or yogurt state. So it's much easier to digest. Yeah. Yeah. But again, it must be from the healthy cow.
The biggest challenge we have is where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's knowing where it comes from. So when I was in Ireland, there are a few dairy farmers and these are organic, raw dairy farmers. And I certainly acknowledge that that's far superior. But the average person living in the city, it's very hard to access that. And again, it's looking at your genes. Because
About dairy-free yogurt and cottage cheese.
well, if it's dairy-free, I think, what is it?
Nothing. It's nothing.
And one lady said, she said, what about vegan cheese? I said, I'm not really interested in vegan cheese. I think to myself, what have they done? What have they put into it? What I like, I think if you're going to eat cheese, but it must be from a healthy cow and ideally raw. But personally, I just stick to plants.
What about rice?
Rice sits over here and we need a little acid. So I mean, if I said no rice, they wouldn't let me speak in Kuala Lumpur anymore.
Is it better white or brown?
Well, if someone's got irritable bowel, they're actually better with the white rice because it's softer on the gut. But ideally, we eat the brown because the brown has more nutrients in it. But rice, if you eat rice, it must be cooked fresh every day because cooked rice grows mold very easy. In 1921, Japan passed the Rice Act. Now, this information is in Self-Heal by Design because there was an epidemic of cardiac beriberi, which was a heart condition spreading around Asia, and they traced it to the mold growing on cooked rice. When you see the mold, it's already well advanced. It's to its reproductive stage, so it's there before you see it. So if you cook too much rice, just freeze it.
Oh, see the mold. Mold's so deep inside it, you never know.
That's right. The mold's so deep inside it, you don't even know it. And so let me give you a couple of examples. Oh, by the way, when they passed the Rice Act, putting stringent rules on cooked rice, cardiac beriberi was wiped out because the cause was wiped out. So we had a pathologist do our program. She said, when I was in university, two things always tested positive for mold: cooked rice and peanuts. And we had a lady who worked in fast food. She said when the health inspector comes into their shop, they go straight to the rice. They go straight and check the rice. So if you want to make sushi, cook the rice in the morning and make it for lunch. You want to make fried rice, cook it in the morning and make it for lunch, but not the day before. And I remember consulting with a young man, early 30s, a few years ago, and he had some health problems and I could not fault his diet. So I'm intrigued. I'm investigating. And I said, you're on a plant-based diet. Well, what do you eat? He said, well, I eat a lot of rice. On Sunday night, I cook this big pot of rice and it does me all week. Aha. Found the problem. I do. Not much.
4 hours after it starts to room temperature, it has bacteria.
Do you hear that? 4 hours at room temperature, it starts to grow bacteria.
In my Harvard class, the laboratory at Harvard, we proved right.
See, in the laboratory, laboratory, we say. Yeah. In Harvard. Yeah. So I've seen the confirmation many times, but that Rice Act information that's in Self-Heal by Design, because Self-Heal by Design is really a book on microorganisms' true role in disease and how you can conquer yeast in the body.
So refrigeration, it will still grow.
It will. That's true, isn't it? See, refrigeration will still grow it. I mean, you can cook it in the morning and eat it at lunch or that night, but you never let it go 24 hours. And you hear what Juan said, if you leave it out in 4 hours, obviously it'll slow down in the fridge, but it'll still grow for you. Freezer stops everything, yeah.
Does it make it a resistant starch and therefore not a carbohydrate?
No.
No.
No, not really.
Keeps the state will stay in it. Your state after 4 hours, slowly tested, you see mold. When you leave it up for 4 hours at room temperature, after you get it in, after the temperature's gone down, it'll start to grow. In that 4 hours, you'll see it. You put it in the refrigerator, it'll grow in the refrigerator. Put it in the freezer, it'll stop.
Yeah, only freezing stops it. I just cook in little bits. You just get used to it. It took me a while because I was used to feeding 16 a meal with my kids and their friends and other stuff. But you get used to it. But I really like fresh fruit. So I cook a lot of things fresh. That is not so what Juan said and what I said. It's not so with other grains. It's just rice. Rice is particularly susceptible. You can get the most delicious bread. And it's a friend of mine, and he uses my starter from Australia. It's about 130 years old now, that we got off an old German woman. And his website is www.simpleneeds. And he's just signed a contract with Target. So you're able to get it in many places, simpleneeds.com. And he has sent me some. I'm hoping it comes today. It's all sourdough and it's all totally gluten-free. It's beautiful bread. And you can keep it in the fridge for 6 weeks. And it seems a bit hard, but you put it in the toaster, even after 6 weeks, it just lightens up. His bread is so popular now and it is so nice. He makes 6,000 to 8,000 loaves a day. He's got a big factory. And I love supporting local industry. He's just a young guy, 42, with his wife and 5 kids. And it's just a little business that he built up himself. Simple Needs Bread.
You talk probably a lot on prebiotics, probiotics.
I did touch on them yesterday when I talked about the gut. Well, the prebiotic is just really fiber, and that feeds probiotics. So when you're eating, and I did talk about how, and I'll talk about a bit in the immune system, that the more variety of fiber you have, the more variety of microorganisms you have. And the fiber feeds the microorganisms. And those microorganisms, the more microorganisms you've got, they give off short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids, they are contributing to the strength and integrity of the gut wall. So your prebiotics feeds your probiotics, and your probiotics are your gut flora. And the last thing that I read about it, 39 million in your gut. That's quite incredible. And they've even tested stool and found the majority of it was actually microorganisms.
Back to the what?
Microorganism.
Probiotic, you're supposed to take it 55 minutes before you eat breakfast.
3/4 of an hour. Because if you're having a powder, you want it to go down.
So capsules.
Oh, yeah. Or powder. But I think you're best with the food. You're best with the sauerkraut. And it's easy to make sauerkraut. Just Google it, it'll tell you how. Very easy. And yogurts, you can get some really nice cashew yogurt, organic soy yogurts, almond yogurts, coconut yogurts, and miso. Pardon?
For those here.
I do, because of the state of the cows. Kombucha, yeah, the kombucha. Pardon? Kefir. Yeah, kefir's great. Kefir's great.
But you can eat those foods any time. It doesn't have to be separated from any part of your meal or anything.
They should be with the meal. Because remember, we don't want to interfere digestion, so
It's good for gastric greases.
for dog. Sorry, we say daughter, you say dada. I think, yeah. So I'm just sorry, I aren't sure the accent. Yeah. Well, what the first thing you do is you investigate as to why. You'd have a look at the factors that have come together. One lady, it was thinning her esophagus. So I investigated. She had thyroid problems, and they'd done radiation, and that had damaged her esophagus. So that was,
Just PCOS with it.
yeah, well, that's major hormonal imbalance. Yeah, so it's investigating some things that contribute, and also you're watching what works and what doesn't work. That's something that can guide you. It's 12 o'clock. You've sat for an hour and a half. No, I don't, except if someone has tinea on the toes.
Do you use it in recipes or?
No, I don't.
Vinegar, none of those
No.
recipes?
I use white vinegar for cleaning and apple cider vinegar on the toes if someone has tinea or athlete's foot. So I use lemon, I suppose, where most people would use the vinegar. Okay, time for a break.